presentation pane or a presentation pod, and a Q&A pod below this. So I'm resizing the presentation pod, and then you have the Q&A or the question and answer pod right below this. If you have a question, put that in the Q&A pod. That way it goes in a queue, and then when the right time comes, I can answer that question. On the right hand side would be a place for a ton of polls here, and so for example, I can put in a poll question here, and this is a place where I'm going to ask my questions, and you can pose your answers. So you can really select this. I think most people would either be from the Americas or from Asia's. That accounts for about 75% of all of our students, and given the time zone, this is not particularly conducive for folks in Western Europe, at least. So yeah, Australia, I think, is too late. So yeah, so this is the place where I'd be going through our polls here. Okay, so essentially, I'm going to briefly talk about one thing, which is your study plan. How should you think about it? And then from that point on, or rather, I think I'm going to just skip through the study plan piece, talk about it slightly later, and go right into the crux of this webinar, because we're about 11 minutes away. So this is the agenda that we will have. We'll talk about how you currently approach GMAT critical reasoning. We'll actually then move on to pre-thinking and build on skills such as visualization and building argument structure, using two arguments. Even though we're talking about two arguments, we'll have, for each argument, we will have derivative arguments. So overall, even though you'll face 5 unique arguments in this argument, if you add the derivative ones, you're probably looking at 11 or 12 arguments that we'll do. And that way, the derivative ones do the reinforcement of the skills that you've learned in each one. I think what I've observed is when we do this, you learn a lot better here. Okay, so with that, let's talk about how you currently approach GMAT critical reasoning. I'm going to put in a poll question here. So typically people, but before we talk about this, so I want to make sure I clarify what pre-thinking is. Pre-thinking is one potential assumption, thinking of that in your mind in about 15 seconds before looking at answer choices. Okay, it's a term that e-GMAT invented. It's a term that we coined in 2011 when we launched our first critical reasoning course. And the reason why we had to coin this term and we had to actually come up with a pre-thinking process is because we found that a lot of non-natives, and this is a problem that's particularly severe with non-natives, is that they would read an argument without fully comprehending it, without fully visualizing it, and this happens more with non-natives because as non-natives you're not taught these skills. Native speakers are taught these skills. For those of you who know me, I've lived in the US for about 25 years, and I just moved back to India last year. So my daughters, they actually grew up in the American education system, and for them, visualization happens naturally. In fact, my older daughter, who got a 790 out of 800 on her verbal SAT, needed to put in about 5 days of effort. That's all that she needed on GMAT, on SAT verbal. She needed about 7 days of effort on quant, and that the best she could get was a 760 out of 800. But that's kind of the difference, because she grew up in the American education system, because she was a good student in the American education system. Verbal SAT was very, very simple for her, and verbal SAT is very similar to essentially GMAT SAT. Not as sophisticated as GMAT SAT, but very, very simple. In fact, the 5 days that she studied, 3 of those were on the e-GMAT platform. 2 of those were on the critical reasoning course, because where she was making mistakes were such high level that, and in fact, boldface was one area where she was making mistakes. So that's something that she went through. Bottom line is, natives don't need pre-thinking to the same degree as non-natives do. Natives would do really well naturally. Non-natives need it, which is why we coined this term over here. Okay. Now, pre-thinking is not the same as predicting the answer. All right. The goal is not to predict the answer. Pre-thinking is a litmus test that ensures that you've comprehended the argument before, or you get into the habit of comprehending the argument before you start looking at answer choices. And the reason for that is because answer choices in GMAT critical reasoning questions provide new information that pollutes your brain. You don't want that. Okay, so with that, I want to ask this question. How do you currently approach CR today? And there are 2 methodologies Methodology one is the non-pre-thinking method. Methodology two is the pre-thinking method. Which methodology do you use today? I've gotten just 20 answers. I have 50 students here in the webinar with me. Just 22 answers so far. Let's get a few more before I broadcast results. Okay, I have 30 responses and I'm going to broadcast results. You can see 65% of you follow the non-pre-thinking approach, where you read the argument, go to the answer choices, do the back and forth till you reach a final candidate. 35% of you, 36% follow the pre-thinking approach. What I'm going to do for people who don't follow the pre-thinking approach, I'm going to prove to you that without pre-thinking, without spending time on the argument, you're going to find it extremely challenging to solve difficult questions. Okay. For those of you who are following the pre-thinking approach, I'm going to really tell you how to become better pre-thinkers, how to build the skills that are a prerequisite for pre-thinking, okay, and how to go slow. Again, the key to answering questions quickly is going slow. The key to answering questions quickly is spending more time on the argument in critical reasoning. So pre-thinking is a method. Every method or every process requires certain critical skills. Okay, and we're going to focus on developing three skills. The first skill that we're going to focus on developing is the ability to visualize information. And again, it says conclusion and the answer choices, but my goal is to visualize everything that's relevant. And visualizing something means that imagining that it's happening in front of me, and kind of understanding, kind of zooming into the details and zooming out of it, building a habit of doing that. And that's something that's an extremely critical skill, not just for GMAT CR, but not only for GMAT CR, but also for case studies in general, for doing consulting interviews. Um, just quick question: how many of you want to go into consulting or corporate strategy, or private equity, or IB post this? Consulting, IBPE, okay, strategy. So for those of you who want to go into consulting, so one of the things we used to do a lot in 2021, 2022 was to talk to our students, because we've had close to 100,000 students in top B schools, and about 25,000 of them are connected with me on my LinkedIn. So we used to talk to students about their experiences and how did they find a job, how did they get into a certain business school, what struggles did they face, how did they overcome those struggles. So recently I interviewed one of former e-GMATs. In fact, he was an e-GMAT employee and an e-GMAT student. So he was first a student, then an e-GMAT employee. He actually created our quant course, and so he went into Fuqua and recently got through BCG. So I talked to him about the networking aspect of consulting. If you want to know more about it, you can connect with me on my LinkedIn, and we have a detailed description of how we went about this. So the first link over here will actually help you do that. Venture capital is definitely a good option in the US. If you want to get into venture capital, make sure either you have a green card, or definitely make sure you get prior venture capital experience. That I think is really critical here. So same thing with PE and IB over there. Make sure you have some prior experience. If you want to say your post MBA goal is IB, prior experience is more or less necessary when it comes to IB and PE. If you want to go to the US. In India, applying to ISB or IIMs not as critical, but yeah. Okay. All right. Coming back to the skills that we want to build. So the first piece is the ability to visualize information. The second is linking information. Okay. Understanding the logic that the author uses to arrive at, how does the author build upon his conclusion? And then the last piece, which is there, is that's the pre-thinking piece. Formulating the falsification question is your pre-thinking piece there. Okay. All right. So we're going to build on these skills one by one. With that, there's something that I want to tell you, that each one of you we as humans are designed to reason things, and we've the prefrontal cortex that helps us reason things, and as long as we can visualize information, if we can visualize information, we can reason it out, and that's something that is absolutely critical here. And to prove my point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very simple argument, an argument that you think about day in and day out, and pretty much 80 to 90% of you would be able to think about the assumption there. It should come naturally to you. So here is the argument. Tell me, what does the author assume here? Type it out, press enter. I mean, love the participation here. Only high scores are required. You need more than 500. Only students that get a score of more than 500 are admitted to Ivy League schools. Okay, some of you are talking about a high GMAT score. Some of you are really just saying that GMAT's the only criteria. But and so we're going to park the high GMAT score or GMAT's the only criteria. Let's make sure that we're going to definitely address those later on. Okay, but let's see what's going on. The author gives you one data point, says, hey, there's this guy called Joe who scored 500 on the GMAT, and based on that, the author makes a prediction. Okay, that he's not going to get into an Ivy League college. Now, when he's making the prediction, he's also assuming something that for someone like Joe, that score of 500 is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. And this is a really, really critical piece over here. Why? Because the author is not talking about the Prince of Saudi Arabia. He's talking about someone that Joe will not get into an Ivy League college. A lot of you were able to get to this, and so I think that's something which I want to make sure. As long as you visualize information, assumptions would become really, really easy for you. Okay. Um, Now, um, how do we build our visualization muscle? Let's kind of go about doing this. But before that, I want you to tell me, what's an assumption? What's the formal definition of an assumption? What is the formal definition of an assumption? Okay, I have two responses. Lots of good responses over here. An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. A lot of you got this correct. An assumption essentially has two parts. One is it's unstated, which means you can't infer that from a factual part of the argument. And then it satisfies that must be true condition. A lot of people, when they think about assumption, they really call it a hidden premise. They call it a premise that the author doesn't talk about. And yes, an assumption is all that, but every hidden premise is not an assumption. It's a hidden premise, or it's a premise that's not stated, that satisfies this must be true condition, and that's really, really critical over here. So, in other words, there are two characteristics that an assumption has. One, it provides information that you can't get from the argument. The second is that it satisfies that must be true condition. 99% of all questions around that must be true condition. Only 1% of questions, and the relatively easy questions, are around that new information piece over here. So we're going to focus a lot on the must be true aspect of assumption and understanding that. Once you understand it, evaluating answer choices becomes a lot easier. Now let's kind of visualize what does this mean over here, the must be true aspect. Think of this house as my argument, and where you have three supporting pillars, each one of them makes my conclusion or the roof stronger. Got to find out which of these pillars is the assumption. Let's label them as 1, 2, and 3. Okay, we remove pillar one, the roof stays upright. It's weakened, but it stays upright. So pillar number one is not an assumption. We remove pillar number three, the roof still doesn't cave in. Pillar number three, while a strengthener, while a premise, was not an assumption. Let's bring back everything, remove pillar number two. The moment you do that, the roof caves in. That's what an assumption does. Now, what are these one, two, and three? Each one of them were premises that were not stated in the argument. Um, but only one of them was an essential pillar, which was required for the conclusion to hold through. In the context of assumption questions, and we're going to do an example here in about 20 minutes, you're going to see 1, 2, and 3 as tempting answer choices. All of them are strengtheners. Only one of those strengtheners supports that must be true condition. That is what makes it an assumption. Okay. So that's what must be true really means. It means that if the information provided by the arguments is not true, but by the statement is not true, then the conclusion, there's a way to break the conclusion down, which is kind of what comes from the definition of what an assumption is. Okay. Now let's kind of figure out what does it mean to break the conclusion down. How can the conclusion be falsified? Your conclusion can be falsified if Joe gets into an Ivy League school with a score of 500. Is that clear to everyone? Right? That happens if Joe gets in with a score of 500, the author's conclusion is shattered, broken, or someone like Joe gets in with a score of 500, then I, as an author, cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. So having kind of built this framework on how to decide, this is still not the pre-thinking framework. We're still learning the fundamentals of assumption. Let's decide how whether an answer choice is correct. Okay. So this is what we said is our correct assumption. Okay. Let's see if it passes the litmus test, the must be true test. The question that you have to ask is that will Joe get admission? Will the conclusion break down if this statement is no longer true? Now, listen to me very clearly. A statement only exists in two states. Okay. It is either true or its negated version is true. Or you can say it's either true or it's not true. There's no middle state here. If it's not true, then its negated version is true. Okay. So if we really say that this statement is not necessarily must be true, by default, I'm also saying is that a score of 500 for someone like Joe becomes acceptable to an Ivy League college. By default, I'm saying that. Okay, I say that's not necessarily true. Okay. Now, if that happens, then does my conclusion break down? Absolutely. Why? Because if the score of 500 can be acceptable to someone at Ivy League schools, and I, as an author, cannot say with 100% certainty that Joe will not get into an Ivy League college. Okay. Now, some of you may be asking, Rajat, how do you say that that if a statement's not true, then its negated version automatically becomes true? Let's kind of look at a few statements. Howard has the best MBA program. If you say that's not true, by default, you're also saying this piece, correct? You're saying, hey, I don't know if that's 100% true. Then you're saying there's a possibility that this is true, correct? Another example. John runs faster than David. You're saying, I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily true. Then by default, you're also saying this. I want to see a few more yeses or correct over here. So acknowledgement that you guys are getting this. Perfect. Okay. So that must be true. Okay. If an answer choice is the correct choice, then the conclusion will be shattered in the presence of negated version of that. It also cuts across the other way, which is what we call as a negation test. If it's an incorrect answer choice, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of negated version of that answer choice. Let's take this. Score of 500 is not a good score or a high score. I mean, some of you alluded to a high score over here. Okay, let's ask ourselves, is that must be true? If you really say that's not the correct answer, then what you're really saying is that its negated instance becomes true, which means the score of 500 now becomes a good score. Now, will Joe get admission if that happens? If a score of 500 becomes a good score, then will he get into an Ivy League college? The answer is not really. Why? Because when you look at the argument, it's not built on the predicate as to whether you call a score of 500 a good, excellent, bad, horrible, or howsoever you may want to qualify that score. In other words, the logic of the argument won't change if you replace 500 with a 655, 675, or so on and so forth. Okay. Someone also said GMAT's the only criteria. Okay, and that's something that's going to come up in this form. That's kind of saying that GMAT's the only criteria over here. We say the quality of an applicant's essays does not play a significant role, which means other aspects cannot influence admission. Other aspects can influence admission. Let's evaluate that. So let's say this is not must be true, then its negated instance becomes true, that the quality starts to play a significant role. Then will Joe get admission? No. If essays are important, but if Joe doesn't get the bare minimum GMAT score, then howsoever value those essays are adding, they won't even be relevant if Joe doesn't get the bare minimum threshold to get into an Ivy League college. So essays could be important once Joe has a certain GMAT score. And you guys really see this play out also in real life. If you are from a certain area, your application starts to become important as long as you have a bare minimum GMAT score. GMAT score is not the end all. Um, and so yeah. Does that make sense so far? And then I want to kind of go on a fun fact. But essentially, the skills that we want to focus on is to visualize information, build the logical structure, and then formulate that falsification question. Okay. By the way, how many of you came into this webinar saying, hey, a high GMAT scores end all, and if I get, let's say, a 705 or 735, I can get into an Ivy League college? I would love for that to be, by the way, but I want to make sure that you guys understand this. No, that's not an end all. Let me just be very, very clear. It's not. Yeah, it's not the only indicator. A 735 won't get you into Stanford or Harvard. Just a 735 won't get you into Stanford or Harvard. But a 655 might prevent you from getting into a Stanford or Harvard. Or having also a 735 might double your chances. So in the year 2021, we actually did some research. This was still the old GMAT, but the data is still valid today, where what we did was, uh, let me just go into sharing this. And so if you go on this, we have this page called admits and scholarships in. Okay. And what we found was we actually, because we have this page on our website called admits and scholarships, and we have a ton of case studies here that you can really go through, where people talk about not only their GMAT journeys but also MBA journeys over here. But so in 2021, we did this research. We looked at about 500 students of ours who got into top B schools, and we really said, okay, what's the difference between someone who has a 700 to a 730? This is still the old GMAT. So 700 to a 730 means 730 was 95th percentile then. 740 was 97th percentile. So we divided them into two groups so that we could get statistically significant numbers. And what we found was, when we account for similar backgrounds, similar geographies, um, the probability of admission for someone who had a 740 or higher was about 28% to an M7 at school versus 13%. So it wasn't zero in this bracket, but definitely, it's more than doubled here. Okay. In terms of scholarships, if you had a 740 or higher, much higher chance of scholarship, regardless of whichever school you wanted to go to. In fact, 6 out of 10 7 students who were admitted to one of these two brackets, so M7 and T20. T20 is top 20 US outside of M7. Okay, got some form of a scholarship. You can really see that number over here. So there it was a huge difference in. Now, this was one of the most challenging pieces because you needed enough people for this to be statistically significant. We said, okay, 97th versus 99th percentile. What's the delta when it comes to scholarship, and especially just from M7 schools. And the delta was about $35,000 in scholarship, which is, I think, a huge amount. In fact, the person who did this research was also an e-GMAT employee who went to Keenan Flagler, and he got a 740. He was then an e-GMAT employee for 2 years. I kept telling him, "Hey, Sharan, please improve your GMAT score," because I'd gotten full rights because I had a better GMAT score, and he didn't do that. And when he did this research, he said I should have just attempted the GMAT once more. And then this was purely from India that we got our research that 720 or higher for 80% of all the admitted candidates at top European B schools. So again, it's not 100%, but it does make a significant difference when it comes to your chances of scholarship. 26% admit rate versus 13% is huge. Okay. Hopefully that gives you some idea. Now, must be true really helps you narrow it down for the correct answer choice. It'll it'll ensure that that conclusion breaks down and you negate that. For the incorrect answer choice, nothing's going to happen to the conclusion. It's not going to be even, it's not going to break down at all. So in other words, the correct answer choices are 100% correct. Every other answer choice is 100% incorrect. There are no close answer choices on GMAT CR. Okay, so what are we going to do? We want to now do a pre-thinking exercise. You guys have the fundamentals of what an assumption is, some sort of visualization here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a CR argument, a complex argument, no answer choices. I want you to tell me what does the author assume here. So pre-think the assumption. Is that clear? Is that clear? Perfect. So I'm going to give you the argument here. I'm going to remove broadcast results. You guys will have 2 minutes to answer this question. Tell me what does the author assume here. Here is it. I'm going to pause my video and mute myself. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to broadcast results so you guys can see what people said. I'm going to resume my video as well. There's no difference between professors and tenured faculty aside from being rewarded for research. Professors focus on reward, okay? The author compares that less rewards for full-time lecturers places equal importance, all right? And these are really interesting because when you pre-think, you kind of give a picture in some form of how you read the argument, what you extracted from the argument over here. So this is really, really helpful. And I want each one of you to read what people have really said over here. Okay, so let's kind of start with in a very basic way. So what we're going to really do is we're going to look at each aspect of this entire argument, and we will then visualize it and make sure that we have a clear understanding of everything. Now, how does pre-thinking work? Pre-thinking works based on the fundamental definition of what an assumption is. An assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid, which means that without an assumption, I can break the conclusion. I have means to break the conclusion down. Now, if that is true, then one thing that's very clear is that assumptions are built around scenarios where the conclusion breaks down. I mean, if you go back to our house example, your roof, if you were to really put pillars in the house, what you're going to figure out is where is my roof caving in architecturally, and then I'm going to put pillars there so that my roof does not cave in. Okay. And in the same way, if you want to figure out where assumptions are in an argument, figure out how to break that conclusion down, given the information in the argument. So to find assumptions, let's figure out the scenarios in which my conclusion breaks down. Does that make sense? Because the job of the assumption is to prevent that conclusion from breaking down. To pre-think, let's find out scenarios that break the conclusion. Okay, so this is the single falsification question that you need to kind of have this. You need to understand. This is the same question you're going to ask in every argument. Under what circumstances, given the facts of the argument, will my conclusion break down? Every argument is going to remain the same. The only thing is we're going to fill in the blank over here. We're going to put in circumstances, we're going to replace circumstances with facts in the argument. We're going to replace conclusion breakdown criteria based on what the conclusion says in every argument. Okay, so write it down because you're going to reuse this again and again and again and again and again. So first things first, which statement's the main conclusion here? Which statement over here is the main conclusion? Here are three statements. Let's get to 30 responses. Which statement is the main conclusion? I have 20 so far, 23, 24, 25. Which statement is the main conclusion? All right, I have 27 responses. It's really important that you participate because when you make a mistake, you actually know why you made a mistake, where you made a mistake. When you don't make a mistake, you know what you're doing correctly. So either way, you win. 63% of your absolutely correct statement 2 is the main conclusion, but then you can really see 15% of you think statement 1 is the main conclusion because a lot of people think that it has the word concludes. Now remember this. Main conclusion in the argument is what the argument is about. What is the idea that the author wants to further from this argument? The main conclusion in the argument is also by the author of the argument. This conclusion that is being drawn is by tenured professors, published papers here, okay, not by the author of the argument. So statement 1 is actually a fact. Is that clear to people who said statement 1 is the main conclusion? Let me just bring in my. Is that clear? Now, a lot of people also say statement 3 is the main conclusion because it usually is towards the end. And the conclusions towards the end. But again, um, when we have when we are confused between two statements, we should ask this. Let's kind of which we should apply the ABC test. The ABC test really says, is statement 2 written to make statement 3 more believable, or is statement 3 written to make statement 2 more believable? In our case, statement 3 is written to make statement 2 more believable. This is the correct piece, which means 2 is my main conclusion, 3 is a premise. This is not correct. So which is why 2 becomes the main conclusion, 3 becomes a premise or a premise. Is that clear? All right. Now this question is only for statement 3. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both, neither. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Let's get to the same 27 here. 27, 28, perfect. 29, one shy of 30, but most of you got it right. Actually, we got 30. Statement 3 talks about just the rewards for just tenured faculty. This word greater is comparing the emphasis on research versus the emphasis on teaching. So maybe there is about a 70% emphasis on research, and why was I not able to write? A 70% emphasis on research and a 30% emphasis on teaching. Okay, we actually don't know anything about the reward system for lecturers. Okay, so let's visualize the conclusion. With that, we know just the statements by themselves. Let's now visualize the conclusion. Conclusion says um, the, the reason why there's a difference in the performance of these two entities, professors and lecturers, is because of the reward system. So let's say tenured professors have improved the performance of 40% of all students. Full-time lecturers do that for 70%. The reason is for this delta is the reward system for tenured professors. We actually have no idea about the reward system for full-time lecturers. I think we've done all of this here. So let's kind of formulate the pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will my conclusion break down? So we have two pieces that we need to fix. We have one here and then two here. Okay, let's map them. This is 2, and this is the mapping of 2 here. Can you really see how this is the conclusion breakdown criteria? Can you really see how this is the conclusion breakdown criteria? If the reward system is not responsible for the difference in performance, then my conclusion breaks down, right? Is that clear to everyone? If something else other than the reward system is responsible, then my conclusion breaks down. Remember, our goal is not to find out what's responsible. Our goal is to really prove or disprove whether the reward system is responsible. Okay. What are the facts in the argument? These two are the facts in the argument. This is the same as this, which is what full-time lecturers do a better job, and the reward system for professors has 70% emphasis on research, 30%. Again, I'm making up these numbers, 70-30, you could make it 80-20, 60-40. I just like to put numbers because that leads to a visualization. Without numbers, that greater is not the best visualization that I can get. Okay. So in what scenarios can we not blame the reward system? The first scenario is if the other side has an identical reward system, you know, if faculty, if lecturers have an identical reward system to professors, if their reward system also places a greater emphasis on research than on teaching, then we can't blame the reward system, correct? Right? Also, if most tenured faculty does not act as per the reward system, so yes, you have a reward system, but then there's a survey that's done that says a majority of them, they don't care about what the reward system is. They just don't like teaching. For them, they would have done just the same regardless of the reward system, a majority of them. In that case, you can't blame the reward system. If that is the case, then your assumptions are that lecturers do not have an identical reward system, and most Indian faculty should care about the reward system. Not every, but most. Okay. Can you really see how we went through this methodically, and we were able to come up with scenarios to break the conclusion down, and from there we were able to come up with assumptions, and it was honestly step by step. As long as we understood what we were reading, and as long as we visualized what we were reading, we were able to get to the answer. Now, the reason, the value of doing this in depth is how it helps you become better as you solve more questions. When I say become better, it's not about uh, uh, it's about getting faster and precise at the same time, simultaneously. Now, in the case of GMAT CR, you only have certain argument structures. In reality, in real life, there are only so many logical blocks that you can build. And logical structures in GMAT CR repeat. So here's an example of an argument that's very, very similar to the argument we were talking about. A recent survey indicates that independent coffee roasters create more diverse flavor profiles than roasters working for large coffee chains. So you're comparing two entities again over here. This difference can be explained by the evaluation metrics for the latter group. So we only are talking about one group, which is these guys over here. These guys, sorry, roasters working for large coal. Okay. Performance assessments generally emphasize consistency with established flavor profiles rather than experimentation. Again, very, very similar argument, very similar pre-thinking structure, very similar answer choice structure is what you're going to really see. And if you truly understood the first argument, this one would be a lot easier to understand. Does that make sense? Okay. Which is why going in depth, being methodical, leads to this continuous improvement cycle that enables people to go from 30th to 50th, 50th to 70th, 70th to 90th, and then from there on 95th, 98th percentile. Okay. How many of you are concerned about timing? How many of you are concerned about timing? Okay, what are your concerns? There's a lot of time in pre-thinking. I read slow, overshooting time, time's running out. Okay. Okay. So yes. And yes, you have to do all of it. Absolutely correct. Here's something that I will tell you. I feel like jumping to the conclusion and I feel like I've taken more than optimal amount of time. Okay. Look at the results that we've delivered. And this is something that, that's on any platform out there. That's any publicly verifiable platform out there. How many of you know how GMAT Club reviews work? You don't know. Anyone knows how GMAT Club reviews work? How do they work? Good or not? So, to post a review on GMAT Club, you have to do a few things. First of all, you have to submit your verified test result, which means you have to give the username and password for your MBA.com account, and someone goes in, logs into your account, and verifies your score. Then you have to submit your purchase receipt. So it's not enough that you've gotten a certain score. You should also prove that you've purchased a certain course. Okay. So those are the two proof factors that you need for GMAT Club reviews, which is why those reviews, every individual that's out there is a verified individual. And you can verify, you can actually ask them to verify and they'll give you an audit log of it. Okay. And when you look at GMAT Club reviews, what you're going to find is since the launch of Focus Edition, since July of 2024, we've accounted for about 70% of all success, and a success is a 645 or higher score reported on GMAT Club. Okay, and we would not be delivering these results if these reviews if our techniques did not work. Okay, and you guys can verify the GMAT Club does a really good job with regards to cataloging these reviews. You go to the review section, just open this in the new tab, and all of these reviews are organized chronologically. So you can really see the first review is Feb 17th, then it's Feb 11th, and this is all chronologically organized. And each page has about 10 reviews. So if you go to page number 3, for example, you know, page number 3 is 7th of January and then it's 30th of December. So about 22 23 reviews in all of this year, and this is something. So 22 reviews in all of this year is something that you can really see. Now let's go back to this page and we try and look at GMAT Wiz over here, and most of our reviews are, let's say 99% of our reviews are 645 or higher. So here you have February 15th, then that's just one review in this year, and then the last one is September 7th. And then the one before that is May 19th, and then March 19th. Okay. So if we go back to target test prep, again, very similar, Feb 17th, you go to the beginning of this. So just with 8 reviews in the year 2025. So you can really map all of these things over here. And you want to really see whatever is true on GMAT Club reviews is also true on the YouTube channels over there. So if you go to our YouTube channel, and YouTube channel does the same thing too. You have all of these reviews organized chronologically. So you click on videos, you can see how many reviews are there in since 2025. So the moment it says 2 months ago, everything before 2 months ago is this. So these are all the success stories that we posted in it. You're gonna really see a sync here. Okay. Same thing over here. If you click on target test prep, you're gonna really see a very similar piece over here. Click on this. You can really see one here, 2 days back, then 9 days back, 2 weeks ago, and the same thing over here. But if you go to any other prep company, you're not going to see either success reported on any of those channels here. Okay. So very simple way to verify, and it's there everywhere. So these techniques work. You are going to take longer upfront, but you are also going to get results. Okay. And you're welcome to do this on anyone's YouTube channel or anyone's GMAT Club review, and which is where when you look at for the same companies, Trustpilot reviews, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, but not on GMAT Club. Um, it's something that you have to wonder why that is the case. Okay, so how is it that you're going to feel here? Let's say you are someone who's starting at point number 1. Okay, so someone who's starting at point number 1 over here. Now, the first thing that's going to happen is that at point number one, when you start doing pre-thinking, your accuracy is going to go up, but your time to answer questions is also going to go higher. You can really see you're going to move towards the right and you're going to move up. And you might be this guy who's really wondering, why the hell am I doing pre-thinking? I want to fix timing. A lot of people think I'm going to fix timing first and then accuracy. Tell me how many of you were like this guy? Say, let me fix timing first, then I'm going to fix accuracy. I'm way more worried about timing than accuracy. In fact, about 10 years ago, I had a very famous GMAT expert who told me that if you give people an infinite amount of time, anyone can do any verbal question. I told him, no, that's not going to happen. And then we actually did an experiment with about 150 people. We gave each one of them 15 more minutes of the verbal section. You know how many questions, how many more questions did they answer correctly? More than what we predicted? 1.25 more questions for that group. 1.25. So even with 15 more minutes, it's not that time and ability are interchangeable. If I give you 15 more minutes, you're going to be within 5 to 7 percentile of your estimated ability levels. Okay. Now, why is it that this time goes up? Why does this time go up? As you're doing pre-thinking, you're focusing on visualization. As you focus on visualization, you're reading smaller chunks than you used to, and you're visualizing this. And this is, some of you are doing this for the first time. And when you're doing this for the first time, it takes longer. You've never done this. And so your, of course, your time to comprehend arguments, that goes up. And of course your accuracy goes up too, because you were missing points earlier that you're now able to identify. Okay. Now, as you continue doing this, these chunks that you were reading, they become longer. Has anyone experienced this? Earlier you were reading smaller parts of sentences, now you're reading longer parts and still able to visualize them with a similar amount of precision. Has anyone experienced this? The segment, the yeah, the quantum that you're reading and you can read and visualize, that goes up, right? As that happens, that's when you're going to go from point 2 to point 3 over here, where the time to read starts to go down. Your accuracy continues to go up because with every mistake that you're doing, if you're reviewing the solutions properly, that guy who really said, I'm getting C grades, the person who's worried about those people are going to get to B grades and A grades if you're an e-GMAT. Okay, and your accuracy is going to continue to go up. These things will happen simultaneously after a certain threshold of segments, after a certain, that's about 30 to 40 arguments. And that's when you will have reached what we call as pre-thinking hysteresis. And from that point on, the only time you will not pre-think, and there will still be times, is when you're being lazy. And this is going to happen. You're coming back after a tired day of at work, and you say, I'm going to solve 5 CR questions, and you're really tired. Your brain says, oh, let me look at the answer choices. Why pre-think? I'm just really tired. Does that happen with anyone here? That will be the only time that you won't pre-think. But whenever your brain's fresh, you would pre-think. Okay. So, 2 lessons here. One, focus on building skills. This is a GMAT, a test of skills. Second, don't tackle the hardest problems when your brain's not with you, because it does require this. My accuracy on hard questions is about 94-95%. I still make mistakes on 5% of questions, but 95% hard accuracy is more or less a perfect score on the GMAT. When my brain's not with me, that tanks to about 65% hard accuracy, which is still close to 85th percentile ability, but just that's the delta that it leads to. Okay, so please don't solve hard questions when your brain's not with you. Here's a guy got a perfect verbal score. Again, pre-thinking's there in CR, it's there in RC, it's there in TP, it's there in MSR. Okay. What he's saying is you should already be thinking in your head before you look at answer choices. How do you weaken the argument? You have to think like the author. Another guy got 99 percentile. Pre-thinking is necessary when it comes to hard questions. And a lot of people think, hey, pre-thinking is easy, hard is is a bigger challenge. You shouldn't do pre-thinking and hard questions. No, it's actually way more valuable there. Here's a guy who went from a 14th to a 91st percentile. Okay, and this guy couldn't finish the exam, and then he was able to get to a 91st percentile. So when he got a 14th percentile, he couldn't finish the exam at all, despite putting in spending 5 more minutes. He still was left with a few questions. Again, pre-thinking ensures that you get to the correct answer a lot more quickly. You will go through this journey. If you're not going through this journey, then there's something wrong. Okay, with that, we're going to come to a very interesting example. Very simple argument, very interesting answer choices. I'm going to give you, so we're kind of building on it. We started with a core argument, a very, very simple argument. Then we went to a complex argument. Now we're going to an argument with answer choices here. I want you to select not answered before I give you the poll. That way, when you choose an option other than not answered, I know that you've responded, and that way I won't call time. Can I get about 15 people to select not answered? That way I have a somewhat statistically significant number of folks here. Good, thank you. Here is the question. I'm going to pause myself and mute myself. About 80% of you are done. Let's get those answers in. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. Broadcast results. We got about 26, 28 responses. That's good. You can really see choices B, C, and E were amongst the more popular choices here. No choice was I mean, the most popular choice was 45%. So this definitely is a hard question. A hard question is where the max accuracy is about 47, 48%. Okay, so what's going on here? So there's a highway commissioner who says that the toll increase will increase our final revenue generated by the toll highway by at least 50%. There's a claim that the highway commissioner is making. The current toll is is 10 cents per mile, and we want to increase that by 50%. Okay, and based on this, we're saying the revenue is going to go up by about 50% here. Okay, that's my conclusion. Now, visualizing the conclusion, really, really important. If last year our annual revenue was, let's say, 1 million, if our annual was $1 million, this year it will be at least 1.5. Okay, that's what. So we're going to really get to the options that are correct. How do we estimate annual revenue? What's the formula for estimating annual revenue? How do we estimate annual revenue here? Yes, number of miles times price per mile, right? That's a lot of you, pretty much everyone's done this, right? So let's ask a pre-thinking question. Under what circumstances, given the facts in the argument, will my conclusion break down? What's my conclusion breakdown criteria? Annual revenue not increasing by 50%. Okay. So under what circumstances would my annual revenue not increase by 50%, given that this is already plus 50%? If this is already plus 50%, and under what circumstances this would be not plus 50%? If the number of miles go down, right? So my assumption which is there is the total number of miles traveled should not go down. Is that clear to everyone? Is that clear? Okay, let's look at how you guys polled here. B, C, and E. Choice B says the total number of trips this year will not decrease from its current level. So essentially, what it's saying is that if last year we had 1,000 trips, then this year we will also have 1,000 plus trips, right? Is that a must be true? Do we need the number of trips to be more than 1,000 or 1,000? What if we have 990 trips there, 950 trips this year? Can we not have more miles or similar number of miles traveled, even with fewer trips? Is that a must be true? Is this a must be true? No. Even with 950 trips, we can have similar or even more miles if the average length of trip goes up by, let's say, about 10%. Is that clear to people who chose choice B? Okay, remember, always ask the question, is that must be true? Choice E is our correct answer. It talks about the total distance. 45% of you chose choice E. Now, choice C was also really popular, which was the average length of trip. What can compensate for average length of trip? If let's say the average length of trip goes down from 10 miles per trip to 9 miles per trip, what can compensate for it? Number of trips can go up. Absolutely. So, was this a hard question? When you think about the entire context of argument, was this hard? But statistically, it was still hard. And then on the in terms of our testing, there's still tests that as hard. Okay. Now, why is it that half the people don't get it? So it's not just your group. In general, half the people don't get a question such as this one. And the reason for that is because they don't understand what is must be true, or they don't visualize the information in the answer choices. Okay. And this is also a great learning question because the way it explains must be true. No, very few questions do that. Okay. But again, if you visualize information, if you build a logical structure, if you evaluate each answer choice properly, you're going to find this is not hard at all. Now, which choice do you think is correct in this argument here? I've just made this modification. Which choice do you think is correct now? B, right? Not E anymore, because we're paying on a per trip basis rather than on a per mile basis. Again, same argument. If you understand it, visualize it, you can really see how the correct answer moves from E to B. It's all about reading and understanding the argument. And this is the core piece here. It's not just about solving a ton of questions. It's about really saying what is it that you've learned from it, and how can you apply this right away. So far, are we having fun here? Are we learning things? Are you getting better on when I talked about, oh, what is it that you're struggling with? Do you have more clarity on how to fix the issues? Perfect. So with that, let's get to a slightly more interesting question. So we question 3 was hard. This one's slightly harder too. Slightly, not a whole lot. Again, you guys know the drill by now. Let's select not answered. I'm going to pause my video and I'm going to mute. Everyone's done. Let's get those answers in. Five, four, three, two, and one. I'm going to end the poll, the broadcast results. And what you can really see is choice B, choice E, choice C. Choices A and B are also popular, somewhat popular, but D and E are extremely popular. And this is what I'd expect in a question such as this one. This is a hard question. There was a point where the accuracy for this one was actually in the low 30s. We actually bring the short answer pod out. All right. So let's visualize this. This is a question about visualization. If you can visualize information in the argument, you can reject pretty much every answer choice with fairly easily. So last year, what did we do? We did not recycle anything. We actually burned everything down, which generated a lot of ash. Let's assume one trash can is one truck. How many trucks worth of refuse did we incinerate last year? How many trash cans are here? How many trash cans are here? About 10. This year, we want to recycle stuff. And if we collect the same amount of refuse, we're going to probably put in 5 trash cans here. Now, my question to you is, how many trash cans or how many trucks worth of refuse will be sent for incineration if we collect 10 times as much refuse as we collected last year? Let me put a poll question here. Read the argument, the answers in the argument. If 10 times as much refuse, not more, if 10 times as much refuse is collected this year than was collected last year, how many trash cans will be sent for incineration? The answer is in the argument. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. Some of you actually got it towards the end. The correct answer is just 5 truckloads of refuse. Just 5. It'd still be 5. Okay, not 50, not 100. Let me hide the part. Let's kind of see why we say it's just 5, despite collecting so much more refuse. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce the number of truckloads to half of last year's number. What this is saying is, regardless of the amount of garbage that we collect, we're only going to send half as many truckloads as we sent last year. Is that clear? No? Which part is not clear? Well, the city services is saying that essentially, we are only going to send half as many truckloads as we sent last year. It's regardless of the amount of refuse. This statement is not conditional to any amount of refuse. Right? Is it? Is it conditional to any amount of refuse? Okay. All right. So with that clear, let's kind of go through our pre-thinking process. Last year, everything that was sent was burned, collected was burned, which generated a ton of ash. This year, we've decided to recycle, so we send half as many as we sent last year. And based on this, my conclusion is that we are going to generate half as much ash as we generated last year. So we asked the same falsification question. In what scenario will the ash generated be more than 50% if we only send half as many trucks for incineration? Okay, the only scenario is if ash per truckload, if you pack those trucks so tightly that each truckload generates a lot more ash. Is that clear? That's the only scenario that breaks my conclusion down. Is that clear? Okay. If that's there, then what's my assumption? The ash per truckload is going to be similar or lower than what it was last year. Why per truckload? Why? Because we are only sending half as many truckloads or half as many trucks, ash per truck or per truckload. It's the same piece. Is that clear? So, with regards to answer choices, choice A, I'm going to show how you guys actually polled. Not this one. This is how you guys polled here. 41% of you got it absolutely correct. Choice A basically says, hey, if you separate something for recycling, you will not burn it. Is it a must be true? Absolutely. Is it required? Absolutely not. Why? Because you can already infer this from the argument. Choice B is about the cost. We don't care about the cost at all. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable materials. Doesn't matter. Why? Because I'm only sending half as many truckloads. So if the proportion is less, more immaterial. Choice D is in line with our correct answer. It's half as it's talking about ash per truckload. And then choice E, which a lot of you were confused with, is about the total quantity of refuse that is collected. Again, it's immaterial. Why? Because we are only sending half as many truckloads. Okay. Was this hard? Was this hard in terms of logic? Was there anything which was rocket science in this? When you think about it, it wasn't complex calculation. It wasn't English that you could not uh, comprehend. It was a lot of little things that you had to get right. Absolutely, but this wasn't something that was super hard over here. If you truly understood the argument, you would have had a wonderful time answering this question. You would have rejected answer choices with 100% certainty. Correct? Okay. Do you think you will do more of such questions correctly now? Maybe, yes. Okay. I like that. I like both answers, maybe or yes. I mean, if you're confident, that's good. Can you also see how pre-thinking, how focusing more time on understanding the argument helps you reject answer choices with a lot more confidence if you understand more and more of the argument here? Yes. Shruti, you said no for something. If you can you elaborate on that, please? No was not difficult. Okay, good. I mean, 47% of you got this correct. Now let's talk about metrics. That's really essential over here that you guys need to meet. Yeah. I'm going to share my screen here. So if you're an e-GMATer, the first thing you ought to do is make sure that you go through your Getting Started course. This is absolutely essential that you need to do over here. Here it tells you how does your GMAT scoring work, how to execute it, and then we also have a complimentary live sessions course that we give you for 15 days that you should go through. Then you make sure that you go through master comprehension course, where we teach you how to read sentences, how long sentences are formed, and where and when to pause. This is really essential because if you truly have to visualize information, that's critical. Okay. Then let's go into the critical reasoning part of it here. Our foundation concepts and inference module are one of the most critical pieces here. This is extremely detailed, where we help you with visualization of extremely essential words on the GMAT. Only, some, most, the. How do you visualize information with multiple sentences? And then we evaluate you. So when you really see these scores over here, these are not completion statuses. These are completion statuses are these tick marks. These are our evaluations and how well you've done. Now, some of these you've done, this person has done this on a second attempt. Some of these are first attempt. And to really figure that out, you have another view called the journey view. And here you can really see this person did really well on learning level 0. And then you can really see that every activity has a grade which is given to you over here. So you can really see wherever you have a grade A, that's excellent, which means you did really well. So you can really see for this practice quiz 1, this person got an 86%. The median score here was a 71% here. This was a hard quiz. She actually attempted this 3 times. And again, really important that whatever you feel is hard, wherever you had a mistake, this also shows the habits of high scorers here. Okay. Learning level 1, she got a grade C, and the reason for that was for some of the files she just could not do it here. But then she came back with extremely diligent approach. So this is when she contacted us, and she got a grade A in learning level 3 and a grade B minus in learning level 2. Now this is really essential. I mean, throughout this you're going through about 400 to 450 arguments, but then you do cementing. And when you do cementing here, um, her cementing grades were really good. We always look at last 20 questions here, and you can see 80% accuracy is above the threshold. 70% accuracy in last 20 hard questions is a 90th percentile ability. This was one of the driving forces, one of the many driving forces that helped her improve her GMAT score from a 555 to a 695 here. Okay. And that's absolutely essential. I mean, the fact that you track your metrics at every point is critical, so that you guys can really see when to make a change. It also is a wake up point, because one of the worst things that can happen is that you study all the and you don't get feedback, and then you take mock, and then you find yourself, oh, you're way off from your target score. Okay. Has this happened with anyone? You put in a ton of effort, you thought you were close, took a mock, and realized you were far off. Okay. So make sure that did you do that. Okay. um I'm actually a bit under the weather right now, even though my energy level seems extremely high. It's just my brain's freezing up because of my sickness. So if it's okay, I'd like to excuse myself and not do the two-part analysis today. Is that okay? I'm going to share the recording in which the two-part analysis is already there, so you guys can go through this. I'm also going to share the PDF if that's okay. And I'd be happy to spend a few minutes to answer any question that you guys have, whether it's about your GMAT or your MBA. I'd be happy to do that. It's just that I won't be able to do justice to TPA. Okay. Let me share the session PDF so you guys have that. And then for those of you who wanted that uh, the link to connect with me on LinkedIn, let me also share that with you. If you have any question, I'd be happy to address any question that you guys have. And also, you have a phenomenal free trial. There are a bunch of CR concepts there. And if you want to take a mock test, you can really go from a free trial or click on this link here. Yep. Yeah, do connect with us on LinkedIn, and as I always say, happy learning. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.